So initially, I was thinking of speaking more about the international economic scenario, but I'm sure that most of you is very familiar with this, so I'll be very quick going over these slides. If you want to speak about Italy, you have to speak about, the rest of the world. What kind of cycle are we in? Which business cycle are we in, and to what extent are we being helped? Look at the market scenario, exports. The situation is always the same, with the BRICS performing well. The situation in the US is by all means quite different from the European one, and the huge liquidity that has been injected so far will continue to benefit short-term, creating the premises for the risk of a speculative bubble, which is already being seen on the market. And lately, we have seen some of these signs. Looking at the equity markets, however, we see that we are not getting business earnings from this liquidity, that the fundamental of a good market is present, of a good stock market. So, all in all, the international scenario, we see this every day. The US is recovering, Europe is suffering. We are not seeing these earnings that show major good prospects, but liquidity is really huge, will continue to be there for a certain time. And if it really remains for a long time, it wouldn't really benefit too much market operators. The Italian situation is very special, very particular, and I think we should really start talking about this. I mean, this conference has been characterized by a very lucky time in talking today about what kind of government, how to intervene on this government, having decided a month ago. This is, it sounds like a prophecy. I mean, today we are discussing ECB, the Bundesbank, that are resorting to an institutional organ, an organization, an agency to clear up their European issues. But Italy, nonetheless, continues to remain in Europe the most emblematic and the most contradictory example of all countries. Look at these data. A couple of days ago, we were preparing the material, and the hard sheets for this conference, and we see that Italy is not Portugal, because I'm talking about what could happen in case of bad government. And Italy, well, obviously will suffer a different impact from such a country like, for instance, Portugal. If you have lately gone to Portugal, the metropolitan of Lisbon is still a dream for our country, although we have so many good companies that go to Turkey to build subways or metropolitan systems, underground systems. So this is a question mark to explain this strange situation. We use this term. Stock markets in Italy have suffered a few changes. They are positive in line with other markets trends. The Italian spread is down to minimum level, 260 points. I mean, this is very good and positive. You may wonder whether this positive result is due to the positive news as the exit of our country from the crisis procedure. We have benefited from this lowering of rates more than any other country. So the cost of funding of debt and refinancing of debt is lower now. This may still be, the drift of the Monti's policy. We had many, many more taxes with Monti, but we are now seeing these days that, in fact, growth has not been boosted too much after this. So the overall picture although it is not really the best, the ideal is very positive. In the past few weeks, we have seen some tension being born from Japan, from another specific situation.
But, and there's a but, we have this strange case of Italy, the scenario we are living in. We are moving in every day, according to qualified experts, does not seem to be that positive, that rosy. I'm sure you must all have read the report by the governor of Italy. If the data to comment are the ones that we see here in the table, that is the increase in public debt and also the trend of the debt-GDP ratio. Well, certainly these are not data that we like too much. The governor, for the first time, said something important, and this should be remembered. He made a political speech because, and this has been said also on the press, in particular on the La Stampa newspaper. In fact, the governor, let's say, accused quite clearly a policy which did not govern for 25 years. And here we are approaching the core of the topic, the core of the issue that we want to tackle today. So a policy that has enormous responsibilities, which are very clear, and that have engendered and caused the dramatic scenario that we are going through at the moment. People committing suicides, what's happening with seizures, for instance, of cars, the block of a whole series of situations. So an accusation of the things that are not working and the reforms which haven't been made. So a lapse of time that has been examined by the governor, and in this period of time, two different types of governments have sort of alternated themselves from the left-wing ones to a more right-wing ones. But the comment which surfaces is still the same. I mean, the accusations have also come from the President of the Republic. We saw the President being interviewed by Mr. Scalfaro, and his presentation was dramatic. And he said, I had to come back into the picture because the situation was so painful and difficult. Minister Saccomanni, who's moving very cautiously, is continuously constantly using the same type of soft and cautious approach vis-a-vis a series of let's say, comments made by politicians on what his colleagues in the government would like to do. And always to keep updated, I also wanted to add that also the fiscal pressure for companies is the highest in Europe. We're talking about 68.3 against 65 in France, 46 in Germany, and even lower elsewhere. Obviously, we see where private people are taxed 55%, Denmark 48, France 48. So every other country, I would say, comes after us. The data of export of today, the data of GDP, you must have read them today on the papers, and they are data which speak for themselves, really. So something, I mean, what has been said is very correct. What the governor says has been very, very correct, because there is something that's not working, you know, and this comes from the people who are governing us. And Visco, when he still wasn't governor, has said this, and it's also when you see what the primary expenditure has been in the various categories. In 2008, Italy was spending on average for health and education much more in percentage terms, vis-a-vis obviously the GDP, compared to other countries where we can't, with which we cannot compare ourselves today, such as Germany and France. I don't have updated data now, but if we go and look at the trend of the past 3 years, what's happened in the past 3 years, the sum in percentage terms of expenditure for health and education, for social welfare in Italy has increased by almost 3 points. So our government or non-government, so it's up to you to interpret this, in reality has increased in percentage terms something on the GDP, and said other countries have sort of limited this expenditure more. So why why do I think that this comment on the ill functioning of politics is very well placed? In 2011, the European Commission wrote a letter to Silvio Berlusconi with 34 items, and they were sort of telling us what had to be done. Then you know that the Monti government then done, and these things have not been done neither by Berlusconi nor by the previous left-wing governments. So this was 2011. Today we read this letter again, and we find all of the 6 main points still there, all of the things that we had been, called upon to do something about it, to come out of the crisis. So this means that basically nothing has changed, and I'd like to say this apart from the reaction of the markets, which we know is connected to other things. So, but what is the dilemma? What is the uniqueness of this Italian case? Well, it is that this is probably not a problem, not so much a problem of having a government which takes more or less action, but rather having a government that does the things that need to be done. And it's always the usual ones that are asked us, that Europe is asking us to do. And here we're entering another dilemma, because up to now everything's easy. We all know, we all realize that the Italian government has been doing very little in the past 20 years in solving these big issues. We know that it hasn't really taken a lot of action to change the scenario. But why is it then that markets do not punish us in a more evident, in a stronger way, in a harsher way, compared to what these data would make us think? And I just mentioned, obviously, the special data, just to give you an idea of the situation we're in. Now, why don't they punish us? Because markets, for the first time, have started discounting some kind of strange openness towards the possibility that a virtuous circle that has been started with Monti may possibly continue. And we've noticed this also talking with foreign institutional investors at the moment of the post-elections. In other situations, in other times, probably abroad, they would have punished these uncertainties much more with all the problems we've had, Bersani, Renzi, Berlusconi, instead helped by the Italian observers, helped by our people who explain to foreigners the usual anomaly of the Italian case. They probably have started to think that Italy is so strange in its own way, so unique, that in the end we always come out with a solution. What comes out is our strength, our Latin strength, which somehow or other always comes out. On the other hand, and we need to say this very clearly to try to be a bit more optimistic, otherwise, as I said, numbers would nail us to a scenario where there's no possibility of recovery. The convalescent countries better off today than 2 months ago. 2 months ago, we didn't have a government. We didn't have the president of the republic. We had a path which had been started with the possibility of it being continued. Then you may believe in this or not. It's up to you. In the end, the vote showed a great non-interest for politics. And then we had the risk of a total upheaval of the markets, which could have been represented by the Grillo, by the five-star movement phenomenon, where, suffice it to remember, if you go and have a look at a few months ago, this was an element that had also been emphasized by some foreign observers who were not great experts of Italy, and it's been sort of cancelled by the political suicide of certain mistakes that have been done quite rapidly, so more positive, let's say, in terms of a possible governance of a country, that have occurred, as I was saying, more rapidly than what one would have expected. So from this point of view, we're still going through a phase of credit, let's say, towards the government for it to govern, so that for a first time it can finally make the reforms that the other governments, for various reasons, haven't been able to do for about 20 years. And it's important to look at our history as well. Ours is a country that's always had its big flaws, and we will be talking about this later. The problem of the pendulum. It's a country that's gone through privatization. It's a country that's also gone through the Ciampi government. It's a country that has succeeded very often in showing its entrepreneurial strength. We have a lot of examples of success stories for Italian companies working abroad, and it has always succeeded in, let's say, coming out of a really extremely disastrous situation. But I think we are on the brink of a much more dangerous situation compared to other years. This time, what the government will do or will not do, will fail doing, will really be crucial, because the international scenario that I have rapidly outlined at the beginning, and you will find this also in the documents, is the scenario of a world that's moving to recover. Today's data, which are very different from the rest of Europe and from the US, are really telling us very clearly that we are really on the brink of a big problem, on the brink of failure. We don't want to be pessimistic. We're looking at the first steps of this government, but I'd like to leave you with the idea, before we talk about other concrete ideas of markets, of banks, bankers. I mean, a government that's started off by taking action how? On the reform of party financing with the various bills. We know that a bill can be amended in the first time in the commission, then it can be completely changed. So, I mean, a bill is not the right direction. It's not enough. Also, listening to the people who are within these so-called wise, the 42 wise people for the constitution, who are beginning to perceive the sentiment of slowness, the sentiment of red tape slowness, which are typical of Italy. So instead of talking about governance, instead of talking about problems, we often talk about the problem of gay couples. We spend hours and hours, days and days talking about this. I mean, there are some big hurdles on this market. We've seen these markets, how they are beginning. I mean, there is this idea that there can be an opening, but this opening could close even very quickly. So it's no longer a scenario which allows us for possible catching up, for possible sudden, let's say, corrections of mistakes which have been made. Obviously, you all live in Italy, and I leave it up to you to have a feeling of where we are. But I think that it was very right, starting from numbers, to understand the crucial importance of this watershed moment that we're going through. Where we're going, where we will fail to go, will depend on a series of situations. But I don't think that tonight we have enough elements to be able to predict the future. Thank you.